Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with TB Fork, and this is day 18 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be beef liver, and today is a legs and abs training routine. And the theme for today's workout is CRAC PNF stretching. So right now, I'm going to be demonstrating how to perform CRAC PNF stretching. Now let's get started. And while we were resting, let's continue with our CRAC PNF demonstration. We already did the medial rotators, so now we're going to move on to the lateral rotators. And we're going to do the same thing with regard to the hip flexion. So for the first one, we are going to be working on the lateral rotators of the hip at 30 degrees of hip flexion. And when we are focusing on the lateral rotators, we're going to be taking the patient into medial rotation to stretch the lateral rotators. So what you would want to do is flex the hip to 30 degrees. And then for the hand positioning, it would be the same. We would place the hand on the dorsal surface of the foot. And then with the opposite hand, for this time, instead of going on the medial condyle of the femur, we would go on the lateral condyle of the femur. And we would go ahead and we would take them into a stretch by going into medial rotation and adduction and instruct the patient. Inhale, push your knee into me. They would inhale, contract, and then exhale, drop your knee down toward the floor, and they would actively go into medial rotation and adduction to stretch the lateral rotators. You could also just gently guide them further by giving them a little bit of assistance. And then my preferred method, I don't like to do this. I want to isolate the rotation of the hip. So instead of doing this, where you're getting a little bit of adduction as well, the way that I like to do it is with an underhand grip. I will go under the gastroc, and then my other hand will be at the distal femur. And then I will just lean backwards, so lift and lean, and then take them into medial rotation to stretch those lateral rotators. And then I will instruct them to either rotate their thigh out or to push their shin into my forearm. Both of them are going to accomplish the same thing. So they would inhale and contract, and then exhale, and on the exhale, rotate your thigh in or bring your ankle up to the sky, and they would actively go into medial rotation. And then again, as an added bonus, you can just gently guide them a little bit by assisting them further into medial rotation to stretch those lateral rotators of the hip. When we are stretching the lateral rotators at 30 degrees of hip flexion, primarily, we're going to be targeting the piriformis and more specifically the superior fibers of the piriformis. We're also going to be hitting the gluteus maximus. For the glute max, we're going to be hitting the posterior fibers of the glute max, and we're also going to be getting into the deep lateral rotators of the hip. So the obturator internus, obturator externus, quadratus femoris. To a lesser extent, we're going to be hitting the superior gemellus and inferior gemellus at this angle, but we are still going to be hitting those two as well, just not quite as much as the obturator internus and externus and the quadratus femoris. And then we're going to be getting a very slight stretch in the sartorius muscle. Then for the next one, we're going to work on the lateral rotators of the hip at 60 degrees of hip flexion. For this one, when the knee is flexed to roughly 90 degrees, that's roughly going to be 60 degrees of hip flexion. But what we would do is same thing. Hand positioning, you could either go at the dorsal surface and lateral condyle of the femur, take them into medial rotation and adduction, and instruct them. Inhale, push your knee into me. So they would inhale, contract, and then exhale, drop your knee down toward the floor, and they would exhale, and they would actively go into medial rotation and adduction. And as an added bonus, again, you could just gently guide them deeper into the stretch. I prefer the same grip as I did for the previous one. I want to focus just on isolating the rotation of the hip. I don't want to work on the adduction. So what I like to do is with an underhand grip under the gastrocnemius and with one hand at the distal femur, I will lift and lean and then rotate them in. And then I will instruct them to inhale and contract by either rotating the thigh out or by pushing the shin into my forearm. So they would inhale, contract, and then exhale, rotate your thigh in, and they would actively go into medial rotation. And again, as an added bonus, you can just gently guide them further into medial rotation to stretch those lateral rotators. When we are focusing on the lateral rotators at 60 degrees of hip flexion, primarily we are going to be working on the obturator internus, obturator externus, and the quadratus femoris. Once again, to a lesser extent, we are going to be hitting the superior gemellus and inferior gemellus, but most of the action for the deep lateral rotators is going to be with the obturator internus and externus and the quadratus femoris. We are also going to be targeting the posterior fibers of the gluteus maximus muscle. And at this position right over here, we're also going to be targeting the piriformis because again, between 60 and 90 degrees, the piriformis changes its action from a lateral rotator to a medial rotator and abductor. So at 60 degrees, depending on somebody's morphology, you may be getting a little bit of action in the piriformis. And we're going to be getting some minimal stretch in the sartorius. But our rest period is up. Time for set number 4. That was just a tiny taste of what can be found in my members only section. If you enjoyed it, become a member for only $5 a month to get access to hundreds of member only videos.